It was the kind of morning where the sun rose slow and dusty. No birds, no breeze. Just the kind of stillness that makes a man wonder if the world's holding its breath. Eli Harper was riding south of Dry Hollow, looking for nothing in particular, just moving like he always did, quiet, with his coat pulled tight, and eyes that never quite rested. He wasn't the sort to stop for strangers. Hadn't been in years. But something about that shape in the road, the way it didn't move, didn't twitch, made him pull the reins before his mind caught up. The man was slumped near a bend in the trail, half covered in red dust. His boots pointed west. His hat had blown 10 feet off, and his horse, lame and trembling, stood nearby with blood on its flank. Eli dismounted slow, one hand near his holster, the other brushing the dust off his own coat as he stepped closer. The man was dead. No question. Not recent either. Skin gone pale, lips dry, a single bullet wound through the ribs. A clean shot, maybe even from behind. No signs of a struggle, just a saddlebag clutched in one stiff hand, like he'd held onto it with the last of his dying strength. Eli knelt beside him, silent. He didn't pray. Not out loud, anyway. He hadn't spoken to God in some time, not since his brother died and the guilt settled in like winter frost. But still, he tipped his hat and whispered, "You died out here alone, stranger. But I won't let you rot in the dust." He pried the saddlebag loose. It was light, too light for a man traveling this far. Inside, a flask half empty, a book of psalms with torn pages, and one single letter, sealed in cracked wax. He turned the envelope in his hands. No name on the outside, no address. Just a simple word written across the fold. Please. Eli told himself he'd ride on. That he'd leave the letter at the next town. Maybe hand it off to a postwriter, or pin it to a saloon wall. But by nightfall, with a fire burning low and the stars peeking out through desert haze, the letter was still in his coat. And curiosity, well, that's a flame. That's hard to put out. He broke the seal with careful fingers. The paper inside was worn but elegant, ink faded in places. But the words hit like a slow bullet to the chest. If you find him, if this letter somehow reaches anyone, I ask you to come. Not for his sake, but for hers. Her name is Maisie. She's 7, and every evening, she still waits at the window, thinking her daddy's just late from the trail. I know I've no right to ask this of a stranger, but you're the only family she's got now. You once said blood didn't make a man. Kindness did. I'm asking you to be kind, even if he couldn't be. Please. There was no signature. No location. Just that single, aching word again, at the bottom. Please. Eli sat by the fire a long time, watching the flames dance in his coffee tin, the letter heavy in his hand. He hadn't seen his own kin in years. Hadn't gone near a church or a child, or anything that reminded him of the man he once hoped to be. He'd run cattle, smuggled things through canyons, woke in towns where no one knew his name. It was easier that way. No past, no ties, no guilt. But this was different. Maybe it was the girl, 7 years old, waiting at a window for someone who'd never come home. Or maybe it was the way the letter felt in his coat, like a weight that wouldn't shift until he followed where it pointed. The next morning, he buried the man beneath a cedar, marked the grave with a stack of stones and a verse from the book the man carried. Even the least of these shall be remembered. He didn't know if that was true, but it felt right to say. He packed light, took the letter, left the flask, whispered one last thing before he swung into the saddle. If there's a girl waiting out there, she won't wait in vain. He turned his horse east, toward nothing but horizon. He didn't know where he was going exactly. Didn't know who the girl was, or what waited for him out there. But for the first time in years, Eli Harper wasn't riding away from something. He was riding toward it. What would you do if you found a letter like that? Would you walk away or ride toward something that might change your life? Let me know in the comments. And if the story's settled in your chest, like it has in mine, stick around. The trail east wasn't gentle. It wound through cracked earth and dry creek beds, where the wind stung like a whip and the sun never blinked. Eli Harper rode, with his coat collar turned up, one hand steady on the reins. The letter folded and tucked against his heart like a compass that didn't point north, but pointed somewhere just as sure. He didn't know who the woman was, or where Maisie waited, but something in those words, "You're the only family she's got," kept beating in his chest, louder than any hoofstep. 3 days out, Eli passed through a town called Finch's Bluff, a quiet place, not much more than a saloon, a post house, and a mercantile where dust covered everything but the gossip. He stopped for supplies: dried beans, tobacco, a clean shirt. At the counter, the storekeeper eyed him over wire-rimmed glasses. "Where you headed, stranger?" Eli pulled his change from a leather pouch, slow and quiet. "Just riding east. Looking for a girl." The man squinted. "Ain't many girls out this way. Plenty of widows. Fewer children. You can—" Eli didn't answer right away. He folded his receipt eyes on the window. "I might be at the edge of town." He tied his horse outside the telegraph office. Inside, the clerk, a freckled boy no older than 16, was flipping through train schedules. "Anyone been sending letters? From a woman with a little girl, maybe asking about a man?" The clerk scratched his head. "Can't say I remember names. But a week back, writer came through with a letter addressed to Birchwater. Said it was urgent, from someone waiting for kin. Could be yours." Eli nodded slowly. Birchwater, that name stirred something. He'd passed near it once, years back, chasing a contract that turned sour. It sat at the edge of a cottonwood grove, just before the land flattened out into the Badlands. He mounted up, saddle creaking under him, and rode till the town was a memory behind him. That night, under a canopy of stars and coyote howls, he lit a fire near a shallow creek. The letter never left his coat. He read it again, fourth, maybe fifth time each, word digging deeper. Kindness, even if he couldn't be. That line stuck, made him think of his father, gruff and cruel, and how Eli had sworn to be nothing like him, then spent 10 years proving nothing to anyone but himself. Sleep came light and broken. He dreamed of shutters slamming in wind, a little girl's voice calling from behind glass. The next day, the land began to change. Hills rose and fell like waves frozen in time, and the air smelled of pine. Around noon, he spotted smoke curling above a ridge. Not from a town, just a house. A cabin, maybe. He approached slow, hand near his sidearm, always cautious. But as he got closer, what he saw gave him pause. There was a woman outside, hanging laundry on a line. She had her back to him, auburn hair tied up, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She moved like someone used to silence, quick, efficient, but with a sort of patience. A girl ran nearby, no more than 7, chasing a stray chicken with bare feet and a squeal of laughter. Eli dismounted and cleared his throat. The woman turned, and for a second her face went pale, not with fear, but with the kind of knowing that knocks the wind out of you. Like she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. "You single quotes re. Not him," she said. "Not a question." "No, ma'am," Eli replied softly. "I found your letter on a man. West of Dry Hollow." She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Figured as much." The girl ran to her side, clutching her skirt. "Mama, who's that?" The woman looked down, knelt, and touched her daughter's cheek. "That's someone who came anyway." Eli stepped forward, slow. He reached into his coat, pulled the letter out, handed it with both hands. "I don't know what you were hoping for," he said, "but I'm not him. Just a man who saw a grave needed digging, and thought maybe someone needed more than that." She took the letter, eyes misted. "What's your name?" "Eli Harper." The girl stepped closer, curious now, tilting her head. "You got a horse?" Eli smiled. "Just a flicker." "Sure do. And he don't bite, either." The woman looked at him again, longer this time. "You hungry, Mr. Harper?" He hesitated, then tipped his hat. "I wouldn't say no." That night, Eli sat at a table he'd never expected to find, in a cabin that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. He watched a little girl draw stars on a piece of scrap paper while her mother stirred stew over the fire. No one asked much. No one explained, but something in the air felt settled, like maybe life didn't always need to be earned in full, just chosen. 1 mile at a time. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew he wasn't riding off just yet. The stew was simple, a few carrots, meat Eli couldn't quite name, but it was hot, and it filled the hollow in his gut better than he'd expected. The girl, Maisie, sat cross-legged on the floor beside the hearth, humming as she fed crumbs to a scruffy orange cat that seemed to own the place. Her mother, quiet and observant, served the food without a word, only nodding when Eli offered to help. They hadn't spoken much since she read the letter aloud again. Her hands had trembled, but her voice didn't. When she finished, she folded it and pressed it flat against her chest, like it was something holy. Now, sitting at her small table with a tin cup of coffee cooling between his hands, Eli watched her carefully. The lines in her face weren't from age, but from waiting, from holding too much grief behind her eyes, and still managing to smile at her daughter like the world hadn't broken them. "What was his name?" Eli finally asked. She looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. Calder. Calder McBride. Eli blinked. That name stirred something. A memory faint and blurred of a saloon brawl in Laredo, years ago. Of a man who pulled him up off the floor and said, "You fight like you've got nothing left to lose. That's dangerous, friend. I like it." Could it have been him? "I think I met him once. Long time ago," Eli said. Briefly. She gave a small smile, weary but sincere. "Wouldn't surprise me." Calder had a way of showing up fast and leaving faster. There was no bitterness in her voice, just sadness. A kind of gentle mourning that had long since exhausted its anger. "I'm sorry," Eli said quietly. She nodded. "Me too. But I ain't sorry he left this behind," she added, tilting her head toward Maisie. The girl was now curled in a blanket near the fire, eyelids, heavy thumb tucked beneath her chin. Eli watched as the woman rose, lifted her daughter in practiced arms, and carried her to a bed tucked behind a curtain. She returned, tying her hair back with a ribbon that had clearly seen better days. "I meant to ask," she said, pouring herself a second cup of coffee. "What made you come? You didn't have to." Eli stared into his drink. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the walls. "I don't know," he finally said. "Been writing a long time, miss. Years. Never stayed anywhere. More than a few days. Lost my brother in a flood. Father died hating me. I figured I wasn't made for sticking. But something about that letter." She waited. "It didn't feel like a request," he said. "Felt like, a chance. One I ain't sure I deserve." She was quiet. "Then, do any of us?" They sat like that for a while. Two strangers sharing silence that felt older than both of them. After a moment, she added, "You can stay, if you want, just for a little while. Maisie, She thinks you came from the stars." Eli looked up, startled. "The stars?" She smiled, soft, said she dreamed someone would come when the smoke stopped rising. That he'd ride down from the sky and carry kindness in his coat pocket. Eli exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh. "I'm no starborn writer." "No," she said gently, "but maybe you're just what she needs." He didn't sleep well that night. Not because of the bed, it was warm, soft enough, but because the fire in the hearth cast shadows against the wall, and those shadows reminded him of the life he'd been riding from, the choices he hadn't made, the chances he'd wasted. At dawn, he stepped out onto the porch. The land stretched wide in all directions, pale gold with morning light. Birds called low in the trees, and dew clung to the wooden railing like pearls. He breathed deep, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to do it. Behind him, the door creaked open. Maisie stood there, hair a mess, rubbing her eyes. "Did you ride here from the stars?" she asked plainly. Eli knelt. "No, sweetheart, just the road." She thought about that, then nodded. "Mama says roads bring the right people when you need 'em." He gave her a gentle smile. "Well, maybe she's right." She reached out and took his hand, like she'd known him forever. And just like that, something settled in his chest. Something quiet. Something that felt a lot like belonging. The days passed slowly after that, like honey pouring from a cold jar. Eli started chopping wood without being asked. He fixed a hinge on the barn door, patched the hole in the chicken coop roof, and quietly started keeping count of how many spoons there were in the drawer. Something about the simplicity of it all felt grounding. Maisie followed him everywhere. He didn't say much, but she didn't seem to mind. She'd sit on the fence while he worked and ask him questions like, "Have you ever seen a bear?" Or "Do horses like when you talk to him?" He'd answer best he could, slow and soft, and sometimes when the wind was just right he'd catch himself smiling. The mother, her name was Clara. He learned one evening by accident, when Maisie said it without thinking, watched him from the edges. Always careful, always measured. She still didn't ask where he came from. Didn't pry. Eli appreciated that. She cooked, he worked, and somewhere between the stew and the chores, a kind of peace began to grow in the quiet spaces. But peace don't last long. Out in the wild, it was late afternoon when Eli saw the dust trail far off, near the horizon. He narrowed his eyes. A single rider, fast, determined. How he stepped off the porch, rested a hand on the rail. Clara joined him after a moment, arms crossed tight. "You expecting someone?" he asked. "No." They waited. The horse crested the ridge just before sunset. The rider was lean, wrapped in a duster, rifle across his back. He didn't dismount right away, just sat there, scanning the homestead like he was checking a list. In his head, then he spoke. I'm looking for Eli Harper. Clara's eyes flicked toward Eli, sharp now. Eli stepped forward, slow. That's me. The rider finally dismounted. Dust clung to his boots like it had followed him a long way. Name's Roy Mathers. I came from Bridges Crossing. Thought you might want to know, someone's been asking around about a man fit your description. Said he was a horse thief turned guardian angel. Your name's been whispered in a few towns west of here. Eli said nothing, jaw tight. Roy continued, pulling a folded slip of paper from his coat. One of them left this said, if I found you, I was to hand it over. He handed the note to Eli and turned to water his horse like he hadn't just dropped a storm on the porch. Eli unfolded it slow. You think you're done running? Think again. There's blood unpaid, and we ain't forgotten. J, no name, just the initial dot. Clara stepped closer. Trouble. Eli sighed. Old dust. I kicked up something years back. Thought it had settled. Maisie appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. Is he staying for dinner? Eli folded the note and tucked it in his coat. Just passing through. Roy gave a nod. Good stew smells from the kitchen though. Later that night, after Roy had ridden off with a warning to watch your back if you head west, Eli sat alone under the stars. The note burned in his coat pocket. He hadn't told Clara the full truth. That name Jay wasn't just an old grudge. It was Jameson Klein, a man he'd once called brother. Not by blood, but by choice. Years ago, they'd both ridden with a crew. Rough men. Dangerous. There'd been a job gone bad. A child caught in the crossfire. Eli walked away. That day and left the rest behind. Jameson hadn't forgiven him for it. And now, somehow, he knew Eli was out here, trying to start over. Trying to be better. The fire cracked behind him. He looked back at the cabin vent, candlelight glowing from inside. Clara reading. Maisie, curled up in blankets with the orange cat tucked under her arm. He clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to run again. The next morning brought fog, the kind that rolls in low and silent, like a secret. The valley below the cabin disappeared under a sea of white, and the sky above looked like brushed steel. Eli rose early. As always, he fetched water, fed the chickens, checked the saddle straps. He did everything right, everything quiet. But there was a pressure in his chest he couldn't shake. The note in his coat pocket felt heavier with each passing hour. Clara knew something was off. She didn't ask, not directly, but her eyes followed him more closely that day. And when Maisie ran barefoot into the yard, laughing with a cat perched on her shoulder, Eli saw the way Clara's shoulders tensed ever so slightly, like she was preparing for something to go wrong. That evening, when the dishes were done and Maisie was tucked into bed with her thumb resting near her chin, Clara poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Eli without a word. They sat on the porch again, the candlelight flickering through the windows behind them, the fog having lifted just enough to see the stars. I knew when you walked up that trail, Clara said softly. You were carrying more than that letter. Eli didn't flinch. You deserve to know. She sipped her coffee, waited. He rubbed his hands together, calloused fingers rough with old regret. Years ago, I rode with the crew. We took jobs, some legal, most not. I told myself it was just survival. But the truth is, I got good at doing what I shouldn't, until one job. We were supposed to rob a payroll cart. No one was supposed to get hurt. But a little boy, maybe Maisie's, ran into the street. One of my own shot him. Right there. Just a kid. Clara's hand trembled slightly, but she said nothing. I left that day, Eli said. Left the crew, left the territory, left everything I'd been, but one of them, Jameson Klein, he never forgave me for walking away. Said I'd betrayed family. He's the one sending the notes. Still looking for blood. Silence settled between them, like dust on old wood. Wouldn't have brought danger here, Eli added. Didn't know he'd follow. Clara looked straight at him now. Her voice was steady. So what are you going to do? Eli swallowed. I ain't running again. A long pause. Then, with quiet conviction, she said, good, because Maisie already draws you into her pictures. He blinked. Pictures? She thinks you're part of the story now. I'm not sure she's wrong. Eli exhaled, slow and deep. Do you want me to leave? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached inside her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of Maisie's sketches. She handed it to him. It was crayon on torn ledger paper. A cabin, some chickens, and 3 stick figures standing under the sun. A woman, a little girl with messy hair, and a tall man holding both their hands. I think you already answered your own question, Clara said. That night, Eli didn't sleep much. He sat by the fire with the sketch in hand, watching embers rise, and thinking of all the things he'd tried not to want: peace, a home, maybe even a family. Things he didn't think he deserved. But maybe that letter, maybe it hadn't just found him. Maybe it had chosen him. Outside, the wind began to rise. It carried the scent of dry wood and distant rain. A storm was coming. And this time, Eli would face it with both feet planted and his heart open. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what you've done. It's believing you can still be more than that. If you were Clara, would you trust Eli with your daughter's heart? Share your thoughts below. It started with the wind, restless, unsettled. It swept down from the canyon ridges like a warning, stirring the dust, snapping the clothes on the line like angry flags. By mid-morning, the sky had gone the color of old bruises. Crows circled low, and the horses in the corral grew skittish, stamping their hooves and tossing their heads. Something in the air had changed. Eli felt it in his bones before he saw it. The storm was coming, but not the kind that carried rain. Roy Mathers returned just before noon, riding hard and fast, face set like stone. Eli saw him coming and met him at the gate. The look in Roy's eyes told him what he needed before the man even spoke. "They're close," Roy said. "Two men, armed, asking for you by name. They came through Birchwater 2 days back. Heard Kelly were hiding out, playing house with a widow and a kid." Eli's jaw clenched. "How far?" "Half a day, maybe less. They're ridden with purpose." Clara stepped out onto the porch, Maisie beside her, clutching the leg of her mother's skirt. The moment froze. A family, unspoken and fragile, standing at the edge of something sharp. "I can lead them away," Eli offered. "Draw em into the canyon. Buy you time." Clara didn't answer, just looked at him long and hard, like she was memorizing his face. Maisie broke the silence. "Where are you going?" Eli knelt in front of her. "Just talking a ride, little one. Won't be long," she frowned. "But you said you weren't running anymore." He smiled gently. "I'm not. I'm protecting." "That's different." Maisie studied him, then reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a red ribbon frayed, but clean. "You take this," she said, pressing it into his hand. "It's lucky." His throat tightened. He tied the ribbon to his saddle horn before he rode out. Roy guided him along a shortcut through the pines, then peeled off, promising to double back and watch over Clara and the homestead. Eli didn't argue. He trusted Roy, and he had other things to focus on. By nightfall, he reached the canyon ridge and waited, rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was bleeding orange and red, the kind of colors that felt like a goodbye. And then they came. 2 riders, both grim and sunburnt, with hard eyes and twitching fingers. One of them was lean and snake-eyed. The other he recognized immediately. Jameson Klein. "Eli Harper," Jameson said, sliding from his saddle like he owned the dirt under his boots. "You finally stopped ruining." Eli stood, rifle still. Low wasn't running, just done with ghosts. Jameson laughed once, dry and mean. "You always were good at righteous talk. Thought leaving us made you clean. Thought burying one dead man made up for the rest." "I didn't come here to fight," Eli said. "But I'll stand my ground if I have to." Jameson took a step closer. "You walked away from blood, Eli. That don't get forgotten." Eli looked him straight in the eye. "I walked away from a kid who bled out on the street because he called it a clean job. I walked away from you." The canyon wind howled between them. For a long moment, Jameson didn't speak. Then his hand twitched near his belt. Eli didn't flinch. "If you're gonna draw." But Jameson didn't. His eyes flicked to the ribbon on Eli's saddle. "You got a kid now." "No, but she's got me." Something shifted in Jameson's face: recognition, maybe even envy. Then he stepped back, holstered his gun. "I came to make you bleed," he said. "But looking at you now, I think you already have." He turned, the other man followed. Eli stood alone in the canyon until the hoofbeats faded, and when he rode back under the moonlight, ribbon still tied to the saddle horn, the weight on his chest was lighter than it had been in years. Eli came back before sunrise. The light hadn't yet touched the hills, but the smoke rising from Clara's chimney told him someone had already started the fire. He dismounted slow, legs sore from the long ride, and stood for a moment in the gray silence, listening to the creak of the corral, the rustle of the morning wind through brittle grass. The world felt still, like it was waiting to see who he'd be now. The cabin door opened before he knocked. Clara stood there, arms folded, her eyes scanning him from boots to brow. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. "You came back," she said. I said I would, Eli answered softly. She nodded, then stepped aside. Inside, the cabin was warm, fire crackling, the smell of coffee already in the air. Maisie sat at the table, drawing again. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up like the first clear sunrise after a storm. "You still got my ribbon?" she asked, hopping off the stool. Eli untied it from the saddle horn and handed it back, but she shook her head. "No, it's yours now. It worked." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Guess it did." Clara handed him a cup of coffee without a word, her hand brushing his. It was the smallest touch, but it landed deep. They stood in silence, while Maisie hummed to herself, the sound of pencils scratching across paper filling the room. "I didn't kill anyone," Eli finally said. "But I used to ride with men who did. I let too much happen just by not saying no." Clara looked at him, tired and honest. "I didn't ask you to be perfect, Eli. I just wanted to know you wouldn't lie. To me, I won't," he said. "Not again." And he meant it. Over the next few days, the land began to thaw up from snow, but from silence. Eli and Clara fell into rhythm again, but now it felt more like a choice, not a circumstance. He fixed the porch step she'd been avoiding, rebuilt the chicken gate with proper hinges, carved a new saddle post from pine. Clara taught Maisie how to sew a hem without pricking her thumb, taught Eli how to bake cornbread without burning it. Laughter returned, little by little, shy at first, then fuller, like a song they'd forgotten how to hum. But healing doesn't erase the past, it just helps you carry it better. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the sky in hues of gold and ash, Eli sat alone on the porch. Clara joined him after putting Maisie to bed. She brought a small bundle wrapped in linen. "This was Calder's," she said. "He'd want you to have it." Inside the wrap was a small silver locket, dented but clean. Inside, a tiny sketch of a woman, Clara, younger and smiling, and a baby girl with big, curious eyes. There was a single word etched beneath ours. Eli turned it over in his hand. Slow. "He ever come back?" "No," she said. But part of him never left. They sat in the quiet, stars beginning to blink into view. Then she added, "And maybe part of him led you here." He looked at her. "You think people get second chances?" "I think people earn them," she said, "even when they don't believe they deserve it." Eli held the locket tighter, the warmth of her words settling in his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. Spring came slow to the valley, like it was afraid to trust the land. Again, the snow melted in hesitant streams, carving soft channels through clay and stone. The trees, still bare, whispered in the wind, quiet, but promising. Eli split logs in the yard with his sleeves rolled up, each swing of the axe steady, like he was cutting more than just wood. Clara was inside mending a pair of Maisie's socks, and Maisie was out back building a fort from pine boughs and broken fence rails. Things felt ... safe, real, like maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of life Eli had thought he'd never be part of. But peace on the frontier is never owed. It's only borrowed. Near mid-afternoon, the wind shifted. Eli paused, axe still in hand. A faint sound drifted up the ridge hooves. Just one set. Slow, unhurried, but certain. He stepped toward the trail, jaw tense, one hand already near the rifle, leaning by the porch post. A rider appeared through the trees. Not Jameson. Not a threat at first glance. He was older, gray around the temples, coat worn thin, and a long scar crossing his left cheek, like a memory that hadn't healed right. He dismounted without speaking, tipped his hat toward Eli. "You Harper?" "I am. I've been looking for you," the man said. "Name's Walter Griggs. I was Calder McBride's brother-in-law." Eli's stomach tightened. He lowered the axe. Walter glanced past him, toward the house. "She in there?" "Clara. She is," Eli said cautiously. "She doesn't know you're coming." Walter nodded, like that was expected. "Didn't know if I'd find her alive, truth be told." Eli didn't move. "What's this about?" Walter untied a small bundle from his saddle and handed it over. It was wrapped in wax cloth, tied with twine. "Calder gave me this to hold onto just before he took off on his last ride. Said if anything ever happened to him, and I heard of Clara still waiting, I was to bring it." Eli took the bundle and unwrapped it slow. Inside was a letter, and a drawing of Clara and Maisie, hand-sketched in charcoal. The lines were rough, but careful. You could tell he'd stared at their faces long enough to draw them from memory. There was also a second letter. Eli looked up. "This one's addressed to me." Walter raised a brow. He knew you. No, Eli said. But I think maybe he hoped someone like me would come. Walter looked tired. He didn't think he'd make it home. Told me he'd made mistakes. That he didn't deserve redemption. But maybe his daughter did. Eli swallowed hard. He wasn't wrong. Walter gave a small nod. I'll ride out tomorrow. Just wanted to do right by him. Didn't know she had someone now. Eli looked back toward the house, where Clara's silhouette moved behind the curtain. She didn't. Until lately. Walter smiled faintly. Well, you hold on to that. Good. Folks don't get many clean starts. That night, Eli sat by the firelight, reading the second letter. Calder's words were scratched in rough ink. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And someone did right by my memory. Thank you. I wasn't a good man. I ran from love and responsibility because I didn't think I was worthy of either. But my daughter, she deserves someone who stays. Not a ghost with regrets. So if you're there, with her and Clara, I ask you this. Stay. Be the man I couldn't. That's all I want. That's all I ever wanted to be. If I'd known how. The paper trembled slightly in Eli's hand, whether from his fingers or his heart. He didn't know. Clara stood behind him, quiet. She'd read her own letter earlier, in private. Now, she knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. He wanted us to have peace, she whispered. I think, Eli said softly, he sent me to help you find it. She leaned her head against his arm. You already have. They stayed there until the fire burned low. The past finally laid down like ashes in a hearth that didn't need tending anymore. Spring, at last, laid claim to the valley. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the stone. The stream behind the cabin, once choked with ice, now sang day and night. Even the old trees, brittle from the long winter, showed signs of budding life. It was as if the land itself had waited for Clara, Maisie, and Eli to be ready before it let itself begin again. Clara had planted a garden. It wasn't large, just a few rows carved into the soft earth behind the cabin. But it was something alive, something hopeful. Eli helped till the soil. Maisie gathered smooth stones for borders. And Clara, knees in the dirt, hair tied back, moved with the steady grace of someone who had once lost everything, and dared to try again anyway. Eli had never planted anything in his life. He didn't know how. But he watched her hands, mimicked her touch, and when she showed him how to press the seeds just deep enough, but not too tight. They need air to breathe. He listened like it mattered more than any lesson he'd ever been taught. You're not bad at this, she teased one evening, as he wiped dirt from his hands. I've been worse at better things, he replied, and she laughed a sound. He was learning to crave more than he'd ever admit. The days passed quietly, but not in the way they used to, lonely, drifting. These were full days, days with purpose. He found himself fixing things he would have once ignored. He even took a trip into town with Clara for supplies. Folks were wary at first, but Clara stood beside him like he belonged there, and when the grocer asked if they were family, neither of them corrected him. Back at the homestead, Maisie painted a picture on a broad scrap of old wood, 3 stick figures, standing in front of the cabin. She added a dog they didn't have yet and a son that looked more like a golden biscuit. But the figures were clear: 1 woman, 1 little girl, and 1 man with a cowboy hat. She nailed it to the front of the coop, so the chickens know who's in charge now. Eli chuckled. And who is that? She grinned, missing a tooth. Me. But even in all the warmth, there were ghosts. At night, Clara would sometimes sit up in bed, staring out the window, fingers clenched in the quilt, and he'd lie awake thinking about the man he used to be, wondering if the people he'd hurt still whispered his name in anger. One afternoon, while checking the fence line, Eli came across a fox caught in a trap. The animal had gnawed its own leg, bleeding and wild-eyed. He knelt slowly, whispering calm, and after a moment of panic and pain, the creature stilled. He released it, watched it limp into the brush. Some wounds, he thought, never fully healed, but freedom still matters. When he returned, Clara was waiting on the porch. You were gone longer than usual. He nodded. Had to set something free. She looked at him then, deep and soft. You ever feel like maybe that letter didn't just find you, maybe it chose you? Eli looked out toward the hills. Every single day. That night, with the windows open and the scent of fresh earth drifting in, he sat by Maisie's bed as she drifted toward sleep. She blinked up at him. Are you stayin' forever? She asked. He brushed hair from her forehead. If you'll have me. She closed her eyes with a sleepy smile. Good. I already put your name in my prayers. Summer came quiet to the valley, like it didn't want to disturb what had finally begun to heal. The wind turned warm, brushing through tall grass like gentle fingers, and the days stretched long in gold, full of small, steady things, meals shared without rush. A gate that no longer creaked, a girl's laughter drifting across an open field. Eli woke earlier than usual that morning. Something in the light felt different, clearer. He stepped outside barefoot, felt the cool wood of the porch under his soles, and breathed deep. Somewhere behind the barn, Maisie was singing to the chickens. Clara's silhouette moved behind the kitchen window, and the world, for a moment, seemed to exhale with him. He was just about to fetch the water bucket when he saw Eta Rider at the far ridge, slowly approaching. Not fast, not urgent, just steady dot. By the time the rider reached the gate, Eli had his rifle resting near Binot, to threaten, but out of habit. The man dismounted with care. He was older, maybe 60, with a leather satchel slung over one shoulder and dust in every seam of his coat. "Morning," the man called, tipping his hat. Eli nodded. "What brings you?" "Name's Howard Rains. I ride for the postal horse line long route deliveries. Mostly letters folks forgot or gave up on." He patted the satchel. "This one's for a Clara McBride. Been trying to find her for near 7 years." Clara stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened when she heard her name. Howard offered the envelope. "It's from a soldier. Postmark said New Mexico Territory. Sent just before some fort fell to sickness. My guess, he never made it home." Clara took the letter slowly. Her fingers trembled, but she nodded her thanks. The rider tipped his hat again. "Well, reckon my job here is done." He mounted up and turned back the way he came, vanishing into the heat shimmer like he'd never been there at all. Eli stepped beside her. "You okay?" She stared down at the envelope. It's Calder's handwriting. They went inside, sat at the table, and she broke the seal. Her lips moved silently as she read, eyes filling with something far too full to name. When she was done, she passed it to Eli. "You should see it too. Clara, if this letter finds you, then I didn't make it. And if I didn't, I want you to know, I never stopped thinking of you not once. Not even on the worst days. I was a coward, running from the life I should have fought for. I thought distance would protect you from the wreck I'd become. But it only made the ache sharper. Maisie, if she's grown now, I hope she's got your eyes. And I hope she never doubts that her father loved her. I've done things I can't undo. But, if by some miracle, a good man ever finds you someone with more kindness than pride, more patience than pine, pray you'll let him in. Don't let my ghost keep you from happiness. You deserve light. All of it." Calder. Eli sat back, heart caught in his throat. Clara wiped a tear with the back of her hand. "He gave us his blessing. Years before we even knew we needed it." Outside, Maisie burst in through the door, cheeks flushed from running, holding a wildflower crown she'd woven from clover. "Mama Eli, look what I made." Clara turned, smiling through tears. "It's beautiful, honey." Maisie plopped it on Eli's head with a laugh. "Now you're the king of the chickens." He didn't take it off. Later that evening, as the sun laid itself down across the hills like a tired horse, Clara and Eli stood in the garden. The tomato vines were strong now. The beans curled up the fence, and in the soft dirt beneath their feet, new sprouts were pushing through, tiny, brave, and unafraid. "I used to think I didn't deserve a second life," Eli said. Clara slipped her hand into his. "We don't get what we deserve. We get what we choose to protect." He nodded, watching the horizon, feeling something close to peace settle in his chest. Not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that says you made it through. And when Maisie called him in for supper, Eli turned, still wearing that crooked crown of clover, and followed his family home. Sometimes, the letter isn't just a message, it's a bridge between the life we lost and the one we never thought we'd find. If this story brought something up in your heart, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. And if it stayed with you, consider subscribing, because out here on the frontier of stories, there's always another trail to ride.